I was like, let me record this and then let me get on out of here. So, like, I wanted to, like, talk about this book that I read, We Refused by Kellie Carter Jackson. And I feel like it just connects with, like, a lot of different things that I've been reading, thinking about, especially when it comes to, like, thinking about Parable of the Sower or, like, things like that. So, first, there's, like, a lot that I just want to quote from the book and, like, discuss what the book's about. So, like, basically, she discusses 5 remedies in terms of addressing white supremacy. We have revolution, protection, force, flight, and joy. And I feel like it's just a critical analysis, and not just analysis, because she's providing, like, examples of real world, like, this is black people resisting, you know? And yeah, so I feel like I'm gonna quote some quotes from the book, you know? But, like, for example, when Americans argue over who should have access to schools, jobs, food, clean water, voting, healthcare, and justice, we are essentially wrestling with the idea of black humanity as either a factor, an aspiration, or aberration. And Du Bois wasn't really interested in persuading people of black humanity, and neither am I, the author. This is a book about the ways black people in America have responded to white supremacy, including through force. This book pushes against and beyond the dominant civil rights narrative that conditions us to see black people as worthy actors because of their commitment to nonviolence. I'm writing about how black people respond to white violence and refuse white supremacy. Black liberation is not actually revolutionary for black people, but it is to white people. The formula for full humanity and equality is not complicated. It's not a differential equation or even multiplication and subtraction. White people must be willing to relinquish and divest themselves from power structures that benefit only them. But often those in power cannot imagine change that is not amenable to their position or granted without permission. So I really like it, and I'm gonna keep going. We should not believe in nice masters any more than we believe that white superiority is the natural order of things. Racism in America teaches a prevailing scarcity, that there are not enough resources for everyone. It does not teach that scarcity is created by white people hoarding unearned advantages and resources. This is the truth. We will not run out of homes if everyone has a house. We will not run out of jobs if everyone is properly educated. Homelessness is not required. Failing schools are not necessary. And in democracy, voting is not a privilege but a primary feature. Mass incarceration is not merely unfortunate but unjust. And I feel like that was critical because she's starting to talk about, like, the fact that violence is like an ecosystem manufactured by white supremacy. Like, it's only necessary because of white supremacy. And as a result, you have black people that spend a lot of their lives, if not their entire lives, combating, addressing, avoiding, and subverting white violence in different forms. And so one thing that she just talks about is the fact that we must be honest about which actions produce structural results to, like, actually change white supremacy, and then what actions produce symbolic results. Because I also feel like then you also get clear cut about, like, okay, this is what we can do about this in this way, you know? So I'll just continue. Like, white supremacy wreaks havoc on the lives of black people and strips the souls of white people. White supremacy renders white humanity void and bereft. And in this last quote, it's like, white people are not inherently violent, but in America and beyond, they cannot be separated from violence. And I was thinking about this with Parable of the Sower, because in that context, basically they're fleeing a post-apocalyptic society, and this white guy decides to go with them. He's just like, yeah, I'm gonna go with y'all. And he keeps fussing about a job throughout the text. He's like, what are we gonna do to work and live? And like, she's just like, and Lauren, the main character, she's like, there's plenty of work around here. There's plenty to do. If you want to find yourself a job doing this or that, and she's like labeling jobs in which you return to oppressor, like in some way, shape, or form, or ignoring the violence being enacted on multiple people around you. Like she was just like, yeah, like there's plenty of like white people still in those positions, so go ahead if you really want to do that. And like, he's just like, how could you say that I would do that? Like, you've known me your whole life, why would I go do that? And it's just like, is this not what you like, your like generations historically you've been associated with? And I feel like when you continue to uphold white supremacy, it's just like, boom, like this, you're acting as usual. Like, why are you surprised? Like, you know? Anyway, I thought that was funny. And then she gets into revolution, protection, force, fight, and joy. And I'm gonna say the definitions because she builds her own definitions in this book, and I think that's really, really important. So revolution involves the total transformation of society and liberation of all people, not a few. Revolutions must be protected and enforced. And I like wrote here, like, American Revolution wasn't even revolutionary, and that's what she gets into. Like, the fact that like America wanted to separate from the British and be like recognized as a nation, but the US can't recognize the nations that were already here, or the struggle with acknowledging people within their full humanity, like within their full being, like existence, like instead of subjugating groups of people. And that's what she brings up. Like, the revolution wasn't revolutionary. You were just trying to take that system and reenact it over here. Revolution isn't about moving systems, it's about changing them completely, entirely. And so there's a quote: there's a tendency to think that revolution is scary, full of merciless violence, akin to Armageddon or some other apocalypse. But when I think of revolution, I think of new beginnings. I think of Frantz Fanon's hope to combine our muscles and our brains in a new direction. Revolutions do not necessarily ask for consent, they demand cooperation. American society has trained people to believe not only that white supremacy is the natural way of things, but that white supremacy is the savior that ends revolutions begun by people of color and the poor. White supremacy allows wealthy white men to hold power and make you believe white state violence is natural and unstoppable, and it's neither natural nor unstoppable. Equality, equity, and reparations are not impossible. They seem that way only when we believe that white people are omnipotent. And I felt like that was like a critical analysis, because she starts saying, like, how might our thinking change if we considered mass incarceration as an apocalypse, or economic inequality a catastrophe instead of the status quo? Things like that. I thought it was really critical. And then from revolution, like I said, we have protection, where she's talking about, like, this is a remedy. Protection is like, especially when you have white state violence that's sanctioned. So think like, not just 60s, but 1900s, 1800s, you have white state militias, not state militias, but you have groups of people mobbing, and thus you have that term birth mob violence, when white people get together and collectively, aggressively attack and destroy groups of people and their organizations, their cities, towns, things like that. And so protection then becomes about stealing security back and procuring safeguards that circumvent the law. And so, like, back during slavery, you have people doing this in a way that's like, oh, we're gonna steal guns even though black codes are telling us that we can't own a gun. We're still gonna have one in the house, things like that. And then protection being about fortification of the mind and body as well. And I think that's critical because especially in terms of like when we discuss self-defense, because it's like it's not just about, and it includes protecting home and maybe job or opportunity, but it also protecting spirit and relationship, I think, too. And you can interpret that how you want. I gotta move on. In the 21st century, protection serves to combat local and state violence. The work of protection is constant. And then I'm gonna move on to force. Force, because I gotta get out of here. Force in America is a powerful and sometimes deadly solution for arresting white violence. Force like protection has a range of uses. Force can be a strike, a boycott, a vote. It can be armed self-defense. As I define force, it has two central components. First, force is strength born from anger. As Lord explains, is an appropriate reaction to racism and disenfranchisement. Black anger should compel us to grapple with the grievances of slavery, segregation, redlining, mass incarceration, and many other violent oppressive systems. Second, force is an energy that can influence or change a person or a system. Force can push, pull, accelerate, or compel acquiescence. Force snatches freedom back. That's all inclusive. Flight is one of the most common forms of Black resistance. Flight is about enforcing choice. In many ways, flight is a refusal. Flight can be quitting a job or place. Flight can be you leaving in short term or long term. It's up to you. In today's political climate, activists cannot promise the cure is justice, but we can work for it nonetheless and use Black joy as a treatment, transfusion, and therapy until complete healing comes. So after she talks about revolution, protection, force and flight, here comes joy being also a remedy, also is used to combat white supremacy. And I just like this quote from the book where it's like she talks about love is devoid of power. In our capitalistic, patriarchal, and hegemonic world, Americans tend to think love is weak and even embarrassing. Because white supremacy is defined by violent power, it can never produce community or compassion. According to Bell Hooks, we cannot know love if we remain unable to surrender our attachment to power. But love makes people vulnerable and thereby connects us to others. Love requires community, and Hooks gave us the remedy for pain. She addressed our trauma and prioritized our suffering. And I go a level higher when I was looking at that, because I'm like, actually, God gave us the remedy for pain. God addressed our trauma and prioritized our suffering and told us the solution was love and being in a relationship and receiving his love. But we don't often get to that. And I was talking to a friend about that. Like, oftentimes you have people question, like, especially monotheism, like, how come if your God is so good, like, why is there suffering? Why is there this, that, and the third? Why do people die? And it's just like, well, he, and I say he, so if you're like the universe, she, whatever, I'm saying God, I'm saying he gave us the option. He sent out his love and, like, gave us a choice. I think because there's option in this choice, then of course there's going to be suffering. If it doesn't make sense, open a Bible, read a book, or look it up, because the concept of suffering not happening, like, and the thing is, we only ask people to ask the monotheistic gods. Those same people never ask their little crystals or, like, tarot cards or, like, things like that. And, like, I say little because it's just, like, not like I haven't participated in that same thing, the astrology of things, because I feel like it does connect and it is important in its own way. But the thing is, we never critically think about those things. We only critically think about what has dominated the world and white Christianity, and we forget about Afro Christianity and the fact that a lot of Afro traditional cultures still link back to one God, and that, like, especially it gets misportrayed that, for example, Egyptians are like worshiping the sun, and it's just like no, it's the power behind the sun, it's the power behind things. And sure, they gave name to all these different things, but there's always a remembrance and honor to the power first and foremost, and I don't think that clicks for people. Anyway, getting back, love is a remedy provided by God, and he mentions that first, and his prophets mention that in the Bible, and I think people should know that. And then this last quote says, "And the greatest expression of love is joy. It is an open mouth, head thrown back, laugh surfacing from deep within. So sometimes revolutions are welfare, sometimes flight is motivated by protection, sometimes flight and force are joyful." And I feel like that was a critical way to, like, wrap this whole thing up that I'm discussing, because while I wanted to discuss these different remedies to resist white supremacy, I feel like I was like, I needed to quote the book, but also draw on real world examples and things I've been thinking about and considering, especially when it comes to love and joy. Parable of the Sower, there's this thing, and we've been talking about desensitization to things, and I feel like all my life I've always been more empathetic. I remember even as a child, like, I don't know how people got through Roots and didn't feel themselves going through it, because I was just like, I know it's people on the screen and, like, they're just reenacting the institution of slavery, but it's just like, it's like people as an extension of me. Like, when I see stuff in the news too, it's like, that's an extension. Like, people, for example, they're like that one, like, for example, like the black guy that got murdered by his white girlfriend for talking bad about black women, and people are like, I don't feel bad. And it's just like, I think it's tough not to, because it's just like, if you don't feel bad about that, I wonder what else you're not feeling bad about, like what's going on in Gaza, or what's happening to Palestinians, or like what's happening to Native American and black women, especially Native American or indigenous women, being killed at such an alarming rate over the past decades, in general. And it's just like, so I guess I think about that, because it's like critical, like, all this is critical. But also, again, like I said, been told most of my life, like, you empathize with things a little too deeply, you're a little too sensitive, you're a little too much, you shouldn't be crying about this or that. And it's just like how can you not breathe in and not touch or have connection to the collective different griefs or pains going on in different capacities and stuff. Anyway, getting back to Parable of the Sower, all the hyperempathy is also considered a weakness, and I think about that often, how we constantly not belittle, but to care too much. Like, to care is too much, to be kind is too much, to consider is too much, to move outside of ourselves is too much, and it's considered weak. Like I said, in a white supremacist society, it'll always be considered weak or too much or things like that. So that's not remiss. And I know there was, like, recently an episode I was watching on Black Autism with the N-Word podcast, Black autistic families, I should say, and the fact that even when it comes to disabilities and stuff, we like act like we can't make room and space for like people that are existing different and moving different, or like we don't make space for all these different ways of knowing, especially when it comes to emotional intelligence and things like that. So it becomes like a disability or a hindrance for those trying to move, still according to white supremacy or capitalism. Like, for example, I know one thing that I was writing about, seeing if I can grab my phone. One thing I was writing about the other day was the fact that I feel like we're asking the wrong questions when we're constantly asking about how we're gonna get paid and like in what capacity. So let me just read what I wrote from my notes. If we're thinking about the long term being liberation and expansive and prosperous life for all, you can't be afraid of potentially being paid pennies to work off the land and restructure and rethink what is critical infrastructure in this country. Who is the country? Who are the citizens? Like at the end of the day, if you're still thinking about pay, I fear that you're thinking about the wrong thing. You'll be paid something. Stop thinking about that. You'll be taken care of as long as you contribute to fostering a new world and not try to replicate this one with new rules. That's what I have. I gotta get out of here. I think I have class.